So walk me through the process of what it was like courting a Japanese woman as a black man in Japan.
All right.
So what was it like meeting her family as a black man living in Japan, meeting your Japanese wife's family?
Oh man, that was raw. That was really raw.
Really? What happened?
Her father straight up told me no, like the first 2 times I said I was going to marry her. He was like, all right. I was like, yeah, so I'd like to marry your daughter. And he's like, nope.
Just like that?
And I was like, yeah. And he's like, nope, not going to let that happen.
Was it because he saw you as this black man or because you weren't Japanese?
It was, I don't.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Introspect Club, a club where you can learn a lot about yourself through conversations with other people. My name is Jeff Damisse, and I'll be your host. Now, I've done my fair share of traveling around the world. I've been to Asian countries, I've been to European countries, South America, a lot of places in North America, Caribbean, you name it. But I've often thought to myself, like, I've been treated a certain way, or the experience has been so good in different places that I've always contemplated moving there. But I just never got the balls to really actually do it, mainly because I got a lot of things going on in the United States. And also, I don't know how much I can really deal with the culture shock. But we have a very special guest today. This is a black man who had quite the experience traveling himself. And he literally picked up and left and said, you know what? I'm going to Japan. And I thought that was fascinating. I've been to Japan and I know quite the culture that exists in that particular part of the world. And I'm very fascinated about the idea of someone picking up, leaving, and growing their own community and being part of a completely new community and something that's very unfamiliar. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the United States who don't even have passports, let alone are traveling. And especially as a black man, it's another unique experience in itself. So I want everybody to give a nice warm welcome to my very good friend, Chuck Johnson. How you doing?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
Doing all right. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What are these weapons in the background? What am I seeing here?
All right. So I run a company called Quiet Flame Productions, and we specialize in action and stunts and also training actors to increase their physicality. So a part of that is, a big part of that is training actors in how to move for action films. So in terms of both freehand choreography and, of course, weapons training, too. Right.
So you do this in Japan?
Yeah, I do this in Japan.
So
I train Japanese actors and foreign actors living in Japan, and then people that want to come to Japan to learn the Japanese style of fight choreography, basically.
So walk me through, why did you move to Japan?
Okay. All right. So long story short, because it is a very long story, a long convoluted story, but I started off as a Taekwondo player.
Okay.
When I was in high school. Taekwondo was the first thing I was ever good at.
Okay.
And, by the time when I was 15, I became a junior Olympic state champion for Michigan. I did that 6 days after I got my black belt. So.
And that's where you're from. You're from Michigan.
I'm from Michigan, Detroit.
Hey, Detroit sweater in Japan.
You know what I'm saying? I got a rep. So. But yeah, so I had a lot of really big aspirations for what I wanted to do with Taekwondo. It was the first thing I was ever good at, so I really wanted to try and go to the Olympics. So I went to Korea. I started training in Korea. I spent three years training in Korea.
Okay.
And then I was going back and forth to the States. And I won a few non-Olympic qualifying national championships, but nothing that would, that would qualify me for the Olympics. So by the time I was about 25, I had lived in Korea for several years. I had also, because I had exhausted all of my living options in Korea, because I was going via university study abroad programs, I literally took every single class you could take in Korea. And they're like, there's no more classes for you to take there.
Really? So, they're like the curriculum is that limited?
Yeah, just because usually people do one study abroad. I did like 4, right? And they're like, you've taken all the classes in Korea. And I was like, all right, well, what's the next closest country? And then they're like, Hong Kong. You can study abroad in Hong Kong, but you got to be a business major. And I was like, all right. So I added a business minor to my degree and then just went to Hong Kong, studied in Hong Kong, taught English, saved up money to go back to Korea again.
Really?
And I've been doing that for years, right? So by the time I finished school, I had all this living experience in Asia. I spoke Korean. I lived in Hong Kong, and I had a lot of high-level martial arts experience, but I hadn't gone to where I really wanted to go with Taekwondo.
Okay.
So then I thought, all right, well, if I'm really, really going to do this Olympic thing, then this means from now, probably until I'm like 30, my life is only ever going to be Taekwondo. And that's all.
Okay.
Granted, I mean, I love Taekwondo. I still love Taekwondo. I have a dojo here in Tokyo as well.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
But at that point, because I had been traveling, I started seeing what the rest of the world was like.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And like, I started living in foreign cultures. And, aside from living in Hong Kong and living in Korea, I was an international volunteer in Thailand. Like I lived in a Buddhist temple for a few months and was like, for a few weeks and was helping the abbots with community service work. And I started seeing how big the world was. And I thought, like, when I'm 30, do I really only want to know Taekwondo when there's so much world out there?
Yeah.
And the answer ended up being no. Like, I loved it. I knew I was always going to do it. But, there was so much more world that I wanted to see. So I thought, all right, well, this means I need to find a new way. So, I've lived in China and I lived in Japan. I've lived in China, I've lived in Korea.
Okay.
I think it just makes sense for me to go to Japan. And at the time, my brother was studying abroad in Japan because he. So
you guys are all over the place. The whole family's traveling. Like,
yeah, kind of.
Does your parents even know where you're at anymore? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, they at this point, both my folks are gone, unfortunately.
Oh, but I'm sorry to hear that.
No, it is what it is. It's life, know, but, yeah, like at the time, my brother was in Japan. My older sister was studying in London. So I was interested in Japan because he liked it. And I was like, I wonder why he likes it so much. So then I went there and then I saw it. And then I saw Tokyo and I was like, I just gotta live here. I just gotta live in this place.
Was it the ramen? Was it the ramen?
Ramen was actually the first Japanese food that I had. It was the very first
I would imagine it's everywhere. Like I went to Japan and I spent a decent amount of time there, obviously not as much as you, but like there's like a tremendous amount of ramen and the way that it's served is like a very unique experience, but obviously that's not the only reason to go to Japan, ladies and gentlemen. But I think that was one of the things that I remember was the ramen.
Yeah, it's funny because the first Japanese friend that I met, he said, why don't we go out for ramen? Because at the time I was still in Korea. Yeah. And then my visa expired. I had to renew my visa. So I had to take a trip to Japan. So I took a boat from Korea to Japan because I was just broke. And that's all I could afford was a boat. So I took a boat.
Did you have one of those like Korean hats while on the boat?
I wish that I did.
I'm just picturing
I
that.
took this boat and I was on this boat and there's this Japanese dude sitting next to me and he's like, yeah, we've been on this boat for 12 hours and you haven't eaten anything like at all. I mean, would you want to go for ramen after this? And I was like, honestly, I would love to because I'm starving.
Why didn't you eat for 12 hours?
Because I was broke. Like basically at the time, all I was doing was training, which means that I wasn't working. Or I was working just enough to feed myself.
Apparently not.
Yeah. So
like you're sitting here like 12 hours, no food because you're broke. Like that's kind of significant.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, okay. Here's one of the things about going to the Olympics that people don't know is that it's extremely expensive.
Yeah.
You know, people, I mean, you think it's just all about being talented, but it's not about talented. It's about having the money and the resources
You gotta have sponsorship.
And I didn't know that. And I had zero sponsorships. So I was just bootstrapping everything myself.
Yeah.
And then my visa just ran out. And then I was like, all right, well, damn, I got to get a new visa. So this is just what I got to do. So I took a train down to the southern tip of Korea and then just took a boat. And then I met this Japanese dude and he's like, I haven't seen you eat anything for 12 hours. So I'm like, So then he's like, why don't we go off for ramen? And then at the time I was thinking ramen is like cup noodle. You know what I'm saying? Like I never had real ramen. I'm like, why would anybody want to go to a cup noodle restaurant?
That's college. That's college food. You know
exactly. What I mean? Real ramen. Took me out for real ramen. It was fantastic. And it was a very cool and awesome experience. I mean, that guy, he's still a friend of mine to this day. He lives in Nara. He's just a high school teacher now. Okay. You know, but he's still one of my boys to this day. Just from that experience, right? So my first experience with ramen was amazing.
So you moved to Japan mainly for your. I want to make sure I'm saying it right because most people say Taekwondo, but I'm noticing you're saying it differently. Is that because like the Japanese enunciation of Taekwondo is what? Yeah, it's Taekwondo.
Actually, it's Korean. It's Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. So for all those who are listening, it's not Taekwondo. Stop saying Taekwondo. It's Taekwondo. Taekwondo. All right, got it. I'm learning. I like it. I'm learning. Yeah. So you moved to Japan.
Yeah.
What are some of like the major cultural differences that you noticed right off the bat, just as someone who is living in Japan but is also familiar with what some of your experience was like in the United States, which probably you were far removed from at that point? The
biggest differences, I would say in terms of working out here is that in the States, it's all about individuality. Okay. Like it's completely about like individuality and then me doing me. And like, you know, like, for example, if you work at a company, then it's like, my job is my job. You don't do my job. I do my job. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has a cubicle, right? Yeah. In Japan, everything is about groups, right? Oh. So there is no, so oftentimes when you're working within Japanese organizations, there is no individual responsibility and individual decision-making. Everything is like group thinking, group responsibility. So basically you don't have cubicles in the office. You have an open floor office plan. Yeah, but
do people have titles?
Yeah, of course. You know, but generally everything is just done in groups. And there's just kind of this like, it's almost like an amoeba. You know what I mean? Where like roles are very loosely defined.
Roles are loosely defined.
Yeah, and then people just kind of
fill in gaps.
You know, everyone just kind of fills in the gaps and they all just work together. It's a very, very different way of working. And it has its inefficiencies. Okay. You know, I mean, it's not perfect, just like the way we do things is not perfect, but it's a very different way to grind. Wait.
Go back to that real quick. So do you feel like that's a work culture thing, or is that like a human thing for that culture?
It's both, in the same way that like our individuality as Americans defines how we work. You know, their kind of group mentality towards, you know, social harmony first defines how they work. Okay. Right. So, and then kind of the downside of that is that, you know, you have people that are trailblazers, you know, or people that are brilliant as individuals, and oftentimes they get shut down. Really? Because it's all about the group.
So you can't really you can't even elevate because you're mixed into the group.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And there's like social hierarchies and things. So what happens is you see a lot of creativity shut down is the downside of it. Really? You know? So that's unfortunate. But I mean, again, it's just how they do things. So that's changing too. There are people that they're just pioneers by nature and they just blaze through it anyway.
Got it.
You know what I mean? And they still find their way. They still start their own companies. They still do things their way. I know a fair number of people like that.
Okay.
They're just hardcore entrepreneurs, and they just find their way anyway, despite the fact that that's how it works there.
So it probably, someone starting a business in the United States is probably not as big of a deal compared to someone doing that in Japan and blazing through.
Yeah. I mean, it's out here generally, in the States, people love entrepreneurs.
Okay.
They love entrepreneurs, right?
Okay.
And there's so much respect for like, I'm going to do this my way.
Yeah.
In Japan, that's seen as very risky behavior.
Do they consider it disrespectful also?
If you're doing things a very, very different way, then sometimes people won't like it because they're like, well, that's just not how it's done. That's not how it's done. And you're like, yeah, but maybe it needs to be changed. You know what I mean? But people don't necessarily like to hear that.
So give me an idea of another culture shock between Japan and the United States.
Okay. So that's one big one. So another big one is that theft doesn't happen here.
I'm sorry. Wait, what do you mean theft doesn't happen?
Well, I mean, it does happen, but it's very, very, people just don't steal. Because out here, if you're stealing, then that means that you're stealing because you don't have the money to buy it for yourself. So it's shameful. So culturally, people just don't steal. So like you walk into a cafe and you can just leave your phone on or your wallet full of cash on the table to just claim your table and then just go like outside and wait for your friend and nobody's going to touch it.
Really? Go ahead.
Like to give you another example, like my wife found $100 bill on the ground and then she just went and just turned it into the police because that's just what you do. And then the police are like, all right, well, if nobody claims this $100, you can come back and get it in a few months. And she's like, okay. And like, it's a normal thing. Like, this is what you do.
Did she go back and get it? Did she go back and get it?
No, I don't think she ever did. So I don't even think she checked.
I'm thinking about that
because that's perfectly normal here, right?
I'm thinking about that because I work remote, right? So sometimes I'm in coffee shops or I'm in restaurants or whatever, and I got my laptop and I'm doing whatever, and I'm bouncing around. But sometimes like I got to use the bathroom or something. So now I'm looking at like my laptop, my mouse, my iPad, my bag, my meal, and I'm thinking to myself like, there's a lot of things going on in my head. One, I got to use the bathroom and I don't want to leave my stuff because you're in America. You have no idea, how you're going to get slighted, right? I live in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that. And then there's also which is this is probably like a psychological thing that I'm working through. And this is the first time I'm actually verbalizing this. Wow. Sometimes when I have to go, let's say use the bathroom or go do something or whatever, depending on where the bathroom is, like let's say if it's like an outdoor venue and you got to go quite a distance to go use the bathroom, sometimes I think to myself, I hope they don't think I'm dining and dashing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't want them to think like, oh, I'm just leaving this. I ate and I'm leaving without paying. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird thing in my brain that I put there for some odd reason, because I always like to preach like, credibility and doing things like that. So
I think a lot of that is probably just, a function of just being an African American man, and the fact that you've always, we've always got this thing where we're battling against negative stereotypes. Right. So because there's been negative stereotypes built up about us for so long. Right. And you're always thinking like, I don't want to be the stereotype. I don't want to be a stereotype. Right. So, I mean, for me, a lot of my own behavior is also stems from that insecurity of falling into, the negative stereotypes about African Americans being lazy or being, dishonest or being thieves or whatever else. You know what I mean? So I never really associated it with the African American thing. I'm certain like there's probably some residue of that, but that's not what's in the forefront of my mind. I'm looking at it just from like just the human aspect of it, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, like I can only imagine that you moving to Japan, probably you had to kind of like reshift how
you view yourself in a lot of ways. No?
Yeah.
So walk me through that.
It's been a very interesting process. And it's life is always a process, right? It's all about, it's just a process of continual growth, right? And, this thing of thinking like how exactly you define yourself and how exactly you see yourself. And overcoming a lot of the things that shaped your behavior that may or may not even be relevant anymore. And I think this conversation is a good example. That's something that's still in the back of my mind because of things that I had to deal with when I was younger.
Yeah.
But the question is that still relevant? I noticed another thing that I do that drives my wife crazy is that I carry very, very little cash. Like I always carry like a really small amount of cash.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, oh, I got to run to the ATM. And she's like, why don't you just carry more cash?
Yeah.
Right. And it's just because of where I was from and experiences and all that to just don't take that much cash with you.
Yeah, because you might get jacked. So like you got the Detroit sweater on you, and you have it in your brain at the same time.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's where it comes from. Is like out here, there's no way anybody's ever gonna jack me for cash. It's just not gonna happen.
You can say it, but mentally you're probably still adjusting to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So that's the thing. So.
But do you find that you, as a black man living in Japan now, do you feel like you're treated any different compared to the United States? Better, worse? Walk me through that.
It's just a very different experience.
Okay, walk me through that.
It's a different experience because, in the States, oftentimes when you meet people, they're already kind of loaded with preconceptions of you.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like when you meet people, they already have an idea of African Americanism, right? Like they already have ideas about what kind of things you like or like how you're going to behave or things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Japan, it isn't so much like black or white. It's just Japanese versus non-Japanese, right? Completely, right? So when people meet you, generally what they see is just a question mark. Like they look at you and they're just like, what is this thing? Can I trust it? Is it gonna eat me? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, and then you start talking to them in Japanese, and they're like, "Oh, okay, he speaks Japanese. That's good."
It's like, okay, all right, he understands our politics.
Exactly, right. And then after a while, people will kind of chill out, right? But generally, there are some people who've had really nasty experiences with foreigners, so they really don't like foreign people and they don't trust foreign people. There's other people that think foreign people are really fun because we're way more open and way more direct than Japanese people. Generally, communication in Japan is very indirect. And
Really?
It's all about kind of reading between the lines when you talk to people. Which actually kind of it suits my personality well.
Oh,
so that's one of the things that I actually like about Japan. Is the fact that there's a lot of emphasis on social harmony. So generally, people are never really in your face about things.
So you feel like you're not necessarily treated like better or worse. You just feel like the preconceived notions, which to me is better, preconceived notions don't really exist the way that they do in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, they do because people watch American TV and things like that.
Okay.
So, I mean, American media goes everywhere in the world. So, but it's just to a far, far, far less degree.
And then you feel like the lesser degree that it exists in Japan has a tremendous impact on how you're treated as opposed to what you would have been treated like in Detroit.
The nice thing is that it allows me to fill in those blanks myself. Because people see you as just an empty cup. They don't know what you are when they meet you, right? So basically, instead of having to fight against stereotypes or kind of rewire people's thinking about you, they have no conception of you. So you get to build your own conception among the people that they get to know you, right? So, and with Japanese people, the most important thing is just that you speak Japanese very well. If you speak Japanese really well, then they're really relaxed. If you don't, then like they then for them it's a lot more uncomfortable. I mean, there's people that like speaking English too.
Yeah.
So for those guys, they're just happy to have people to speak English too. But you know, for the Japanese people who don't speak English, the big thing is that if you speak very good Japanese, especially like really like polite Japanese, because in Japan, like politeness is everything.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Super, super, super important. So if you speak very, very polite Japanese, then like, you know, that automatically puts you at a higher bar than everybody who doesn't, regardless of race.
You know,
right?
I'm going to tell you something that's borderline controversial, right?
Okay.
So amongst my peers, everybody's going to slam me in the comments. I don't give a damn. I don't like to use the precursor black, or I identify myself as black this, black that, right? When somebody sees me and they want me to identify another person, I'll never say the black guy over there or the black woman over there, right? I try to use other things about them that are characteristically appropriate to who they are and so on and so forth to identify that person. Because I'll never say, oh, you know, I'm the black guy that does bop, 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 right? The reason why I don't do that is when we're describing ourselves based on these Crayola colors, I call it, right? White guy, black guy, you know what I mean? I think we're diffusing the individuality that comes from that person. Like you mentioned, you get to fill in your own gaps in Japan, whereas in the United States, you don't, right? So in the United States, if you say you're a black guy, whether you know it or not, there's all these ideas about who you potentially are before you even get a chance to speak.
Exactly.
Right. So it's really problematic, and a lot of people deal with it in different ways. Some people are like, oh, I'm proud to be black, this, that, and the third. And I don't want people to think like, oh, I'm not proud to be such and such, but like, my proudness doesn't come from the amount of melanin that comes in my skin, right? My proudness comes from, you know, the tremendous amount of things that me and my family and my culture, because I'm not originally from the United States. Nobody knows that. They just see a color. They think I'm African American or whatever, when in reality, my culture is from a different country. Okay. But I like the idea of, you know, people filling in their gaps, or the gaps about what people don't know about themselves versus other people using the media, other people just creating this aggregate of like, okay, everybody who looks like this likes these things. And I don't subscribe to that. And I like the fact that you in Japan, you get to speak your own voice about who you are as a person, rather than trying to like, you know, fight some stereotype that is so abundant, such as the United States.
Exactly.
And I think I think that's phenomenal. But okay, so you're saying people don't steal. Do you feel like you have any type of like interaction with the police that's different in Japan compared to United States? Yeah,
but because to be honest, you know, I mean, I do, like if I'm on a bicycle, the police will stop me and be like, yeah, we just want to check and make sure that this is your bicycle.
Really?
That does happen. Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's happening because of what they think you are based on what you look like? Or do you think it's happening because they like to do those random checks?
It could be either or, you know? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I get pulled over a lot.
Do you?
You know what I mean? Like I have that feeling, but like the thing is like, I don't know. I don't know if it's because of stereotypes, or I don't know if it's just because they're just doing it to everybody, you know? So it could be either way. But really? I mean, the nice thing is that the police are always very, very, very polite here. They're extremely polite. So, and to be honest, in the States, I didn't really have bad experiences with police officers either. They were always really nice guys.
Okay.
You know, I know a lot of African Americans have had really, really nasty interactions with the police. I never did. So I can't, you know, I can't necessarily say that I had a bad experience with police in the States either.
Okay.
But I do get, you know, stopped for things. If to me it feels like a lot, but again, it might just be because I'm sensitive, you know? So, yeah,
okay.
so I don't know.
So I mean, that's quite the culture shock. Like, given everything you just mentioned, moving to Japan and having to experience all these things. Like, I have my own set of like culture shock not moving to Japan, but when I went to Japan, there's two things that are glaring to me when I think about it. So in Japan, you guys have this thing where like if you're paying for something, you got to put the money or the card on this little tray. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. You put it in the tray and then you got to slide it over to the vendor or whoever's behind the counter or whatever. And then they slide the tray back with the receipt or your change or whatever. Right. And I always thought that was kind of odd. I'm like, you could just hand it over to me. Like, why I got to put it on this tray? At first I thought it was a couple places. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah. Right. So then, I went to a bunch of restaurants that were doing this. I went to this massage place. I don't want anybody to think anything crazy. A regular massage place. It's not, I like massages. I went to get a massage, right? And I finished getting the treatment, and I went to the counter. I was by myself because like there were times when I travel with my friends, like we like to separate and then come back. You know what I mean? So I was just walking around Tokyo. Was it Tokyo or Kyoto? I can't remember which city it was, but they hand me the tray at the counter to pay for my service. And I had my credit card and I was going to give him my credit card. And he hands me the tray. So then I'm like, you know what, let me try something. So I bypassed the tray and I hovered the card over the tray towards him. And you know what he does? He doubles down and he slides the tray even closer to me. Right? Yeah. So I triple down. I bring the card even closer to him, right? Just to see like how much of an emphasis is this? How important is this? And you know what he does finally? He snatches the credit card out of my hand, slams it down onto the tray, and then kindly brings the tray towards him. I was like, damn. Oh, y'all for real, for real. Now, what is that?
The reason is cleanliness. It's so that people don't touch hands.
But you're touching the stuff that I'm putting on the tray.
Yeah. So, but that's why they do it. Is it's just so you're not actually touching hands with somebody else. So it's about I mean, one is cleanliness, and then two, in general, Japanese people, they don't really touch. You know what I'm saying? Like people don't really hug or hold hands. You know what I mean? Like especially outside of the family, it's just not a thing. So physical contact, even among couples, is really light. Yeah. I mean, of course, in the home it's different because people make babies. You know what I'm saying? But like, within public, you rarely see people ever physically touch each other. So the idea of touching a stranger too is even more uncomfortable.
So what is? Go ahead.
So you know what I mean? Like with in the States, everybody like hugs goodbye and hugs hello, and they just don't do that. Even like Japanese friends that I've had for years, if I tried to hug them, it would just be like, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, some people will be open to it because they like it, but most people, it just makes them uncomfortable. So, and that's among like friends. So if you have to like physically touch a stranger, that's like, just some random person, and that's like, whoa, right?
So what does it look like a man courting a woman in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, they go out, they talk, the affection isn't necessarily physical. It's just not, they just don't touch very much, which as a Westerner is mad confusing if you're trying to date, right? Because you're like,
I'm like, she's not into it, man. She's not into it.
Exactly, right? Like you try to touch them and they're like, ooh, right? And it's like, all right, well, that's obviously I've been shot down there. She must not be interested. And then they'll call and be like, well, aren't we going to see each other again? And I'm like, but you were afraid for me to touch. So it made dating really confusing, man. But like, yeah, they just don't. That's just not how they roll. They just don't really touch. I mean, it's one of the things that makes. I've been to 33 countries.
Wow.
Good
for you.
Been as far south as Ushuaia, the southern tip of South America.
Can't pronounce
far north as the Arctic Circle of Norway. And I've never been anywhere that has a culture that's as different as Japan is. Just everything about the way that they do things and the way that they think and operate. And like I said, it's not necessarily better, but it's just very, very different from everywhere else.
So,
and one of them is the fact that they just don't touch.
So let's talk about the courtship process in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple things. You mentioned to me that, obviously they touch it in the home, they make babies, but I've heard that the birth rate is super low there.
I think that's a big part of it, is it's a lack of physical affection.
Okay, but people are dating and they're getting married and having children. So that's not the lack of physical touch is not preventing them from like creating families directly, right? Or what's the issue? But
a lot of marriage, I mean, obviously not, things are changing, cultures evolve, but traditionally marriage here was a very, very pragmatic thing, right? It's like, all right, well, this dude earns this much money.
Okay.
So he should be a good provider. So this woman's like, all right, well, he looks like he'd be a really good provider. I'm going to go for this guy. And then
what are the reasons they go for the woman?
And then for the guy, he's like, all right, well, she's really cute. She looks like she'd be stable. She looks like she'd be a big mother or a good mother.
I'm big mother. You said.
Sorry. My mistake, right? But I mean, it was just very pragmatic like that, right? So it was more about like, and then you have the social pressure to have a family and all that, right? Because in Japan, social pressure is a big thing. And there's a very positive side to it.
Okay.
And there's a negative side to it.
Well, before we get to that, you're saying there's this pressure to have a family, but why would the birth rate be low if
it's because a lot of people, they marry, but they don't actually love each other. Oh. You know what I'm saying? Like they're marrying because getting married is what you're supposed to do. So you find somebody that you think would be like that ticks all the boxes, and they're like, okay, yeah, let's see, physical attractive enough, mentally stable, comes from a good family. Okay, she's good, and then, but it's not necessarily. But
when the woman even if she was with somebody that she didn't like, wouldn't she still, whether she or he, wouldn't they still have the desire to raise children in some capacity, regardless if they like each other or not, because they already signed up to be together anyway?
Well, that's what I mean. Is they want to be good parents, and you have a lot of couples where the mother absolutely loves the child, but she doesn't really care about the father anymore because he made the babies. That was his job done. And then he's like, all right, I made the babies. My job's done. And then he just kind of does his own thing.
I know, but I'm trying to understand why the birth rate is low if they're still having kids.
Because there's like I said, there's a lot of loveless marriages, right? So, and you can't really make babies without love, man. I mean, you can. You can.
I know a couple, well, I don't know, but I'm sure a couple people who had one night stands that created a baby. Doesn't mean they love each other.
You know what I mean? Like, but
I get it.
You have to be in the mood.
I got it.
You know what I'm saying? And like, you have to want to do it with that person.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of the reasons why the birth rate is so low. I think the other reason that the birth rate is so low is purely because the work ethic here is so intense. And that came from the World War. That actually came from the rebuilding effort after World War II. So they were like, all right, everything's been decimated. We got to rebuild. We got to work 50 hours a week. We got to work 80 hours a week until we rebuild Japan.
Yeah.
And then that's where it came from.
Yeah.
And then it just never went away. You know what I mean? So you still have people that are working, 60, 70 hours a week, like especially the guys.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're working that much, like you're too tired to want to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you're just mentally worn out. Like all you're gonna do is sleep. You get home at midnight every night. You wake up at 6 a.m. and go back the next day. When do you have time
to even have the children, let alone raise them?
Yeah, right. Or when do you even have time to like go out on a date with your wife or to like flirt? When like your mental space is so heavily occupied with your work, right? So that's another reason. The birth rate thing. It's a very complex issue.
I'm sure it is. Yeah,
it's not one thing, but it's a lot of different things together. This could be like a 5-hour conversation by itself.
I'm sure. But what you said sparked something in my brain where I remember when I was in Japan, there was this woman that I met there. hitting on her or anything. Relax, everybody. I'm not out here going to Japan just to meet women. I went to Japan, and there was this woman that was a friend of some of the guys that I went to Japan with. Mind you, like all the friends I went to Japan with, they were all Asian. I'm like the only melanated guy in every event we went to. But like I was having a conversation with this woman, and then we got to talking about some of the things we're talking about here. And she said something very peculiar where, you know how like in the United States, it's like very taboo for like to be fraternizing at work to some capacity, dating someone at work, and so on and so forth, right? So like HR will be on your case if there's any type of like, you know, things like that that's out of bounds. But what she said, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's like a different perspective coming from you, she said in Japan, an example for a woman going into a workplace, right? She'll go to school. She'll go to a very good school, be educated, and get a good job. She'll go to HR to sign up for that job or to be interviewed. And HR would be like, "Oh, you're cute. You'll be really good for the guys here." That's what she said. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. And I'm like, really? I'm like, why is that? She's like, well, typically in Japan, this is what she's told me, this Japanese woman. She said, a lot of women and men meet at work. Yeah, to your point, they work so much that's also who they socialize with the most.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's completely true. Almost everybody that I know is like, yeah, I met my husband, or I met my wife at work.
Right. It's like, oh, I realized he was a good suitor at work. So
yeah.
But to her point, she also said, once a woman gets married in Japan after meeting her guy at work, it's looked down upon if she continues to work.
That can be a thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, I know women that do.
Okay.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a lot. It's interesting because there's a lot of one thing that I want to be very wary of is I don't want to speak as if, you know, I'm judging Japanese culture, you know, like looking at it and and the things that I'm saying are judgmental. Like I don't, because like I live here, I love it here, obviously.
Clearly.
You know, clearly, right? But you know, sexism is still a thing here, you know? So, and I mean, it's an issue that's being worked on, and that women are fighting to change, and that, you know, and there's guys that are fighting to change it too. But one of the things about Japan is that is basically, because it's such a hierarchical place, you have old guys making decisions about everything. Decisions about everything
the
are just
elders.
Made by old. Exactly, right? It's exactly like that. So as a function
I picture them in a temple just humming.
more like in a board in a bunch of suits, like smoking is closer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right. So, you know, so you have a lot of these old guys that are from a very, very sexist generation, and they're still making most of the decisions.
But how is that different from the United States?
So, well, I think in the States there's a lot more room for people that are real sharp. You know, somebody will recognize that and then push to get them somewhere. You know,
like
what I
even
mean?
women, like even women.
Yeah, even women. You know, and people that are like clearly have a good entrepreneurial sense, or you know, have a good people that deserve to be successful, even though they're young. People will help them get there, and in Japan, you don't see that as much. Of course, in the States, people have to fight against that too, but in Japan, it's a much harder fight than it is.
But do you feel like a lot of women in Japan are fighting for equality?
Oh, absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. I mean, like the things, you know, Japan is still very much male dominant society.
More so than the United States.
Absolutely. Really? Absolutely. So in terms of like equal rights for women, it's pretty low.
Are there some very deliberate mistreatment of women in Japan?
Yeah.
Give me some examples.
You know, I mean, one example is you know, on women being sexually harassed on crowded trains because the trains packed to capacity. So, sometimes guys will just like reach up under their skirt, or like, you see this kind of stuff all the time. Well, not all the time, but like it does very much happen. So,
I'm assuming more so than the United States.
Oh yeah, way more so. Because the thing about, if you do that to an American woman, she's likely to punch you. You know what I'm saying? Or she's likely to like scream out and like embarrass you if you did some stuff like that. But Japanese women, oftentimes they won't. They'll just take it. So Japanese guys think they can just get away with it, so they'll just keep doing it. And you have you have guys that will stand up for women so that doesn't happen. But there's still a lot more of the guys that do it. You know what I mean?
But what's motivating the guys to be those type of guys if they exist in such volume?
Just because they can. Because there's just like, there's no, like I said, there's people don't fight back against it as much. They do it because they can get away with it. And then the other thing that's happening too is that you have, aside from the fact that generally people don't touch, the other thing you have about Japan is that you're dealing with a society of people where most people are extremely shy. Okay. At least not so much in Osaka, but especially Tokyoites, everybody's very, very shy.
Okay.
So what that means is you have a lot of people who just don't date. You know what I mean? You have a lot of people that go their entire lives as virgins, right? Which is another reason why you have the low birth rate, right? So oftentimes these guys, they're just very, very socially awkward, and they don't know what else to do. So they just do things that are very inappropriate, or they become stalkers or whatever, right? So,
but I'm glad you said that, because I did notice something when I was in Japan. Mm-hmm. Okay. What I noticed was, despite the fact that, like, yes, people are very shy in Japan, right? They're very, stuff like that. And it's very bothersome to know that guys are sexually harassing women in the trains in Japan openly, and no one's doing anything significant about it. But what I did notice in Japan that might contribute to what you just said, Japan has a very big porn industry.
And a lot of that is, like I said, because you have so many guys that have simply never been laid, right? But then again, it's that same kind of self-perpetuating cycle, because oftentimes what happens is like the reason that they're so into porn is because they're not getting laid, but the fact that they're so into porn is why they're not getting laid. You know what I'm saying? Because they're not.
Oh yeah, it's like a revolving thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I went to, and I remember, and the reason why I noticed it is, like, if you think of like any type of corner store or any type of like pharmacy in the United States, there's a magazine stand, right? The magazine stands that are out in the open, out in the front of the store, or out, wherever. There's like, Sports Illustrated, there's like Fishing Magazine and so on and so forth. And there might be like some risque magazines that like are a little provocative, but even those, like in the United States, there's like rules to like put like a mesh in front of the magazine to not make it like open to for kids to see it, and so on and so forth. In Japan, you'll see Sports Illustrated, you'll see like ESPN magazine, you'll see like a Home Advisor magazine, and then you'll see like a straight like anime porn magazine right next to it, right next to the fruits and bananas and so forth. What is that?
The other reason for that too is that, in general, America is basically, I mean, obviously not everybody, but American culture is basically kind of Christian Catholic, right?
Okay.
So as a function of that, we're taught to cover up, right? So, okay. I mean, that's, even if you look at Adam and Eve, right? Like Adam always had like the little like leaf over his junk, right? I mean, not necessarily like being naked is kind of shameful, right? And whereas in Japan, because they don't come from that Christian background, they have no shame whatsoever with being naked. Like,
really?
It's just not. Yeah,
you just said they were shy, so they're not shy about their own nudity, but they're shy about making physical contact. Really?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, so like for example, if you go to a hot bath, everybody's just mobbing around naked, and like nobody's shy about it. And and then parents
that's like a locker room. That's like a locker room.
Yeah. And parents will bring their kids in there. Another thing you see is like I was watching a variety show, a Japanese variety show, and then the host had to do this thing. Japanese variety shows are crazy, but anyway, like one of the hosts, he ended up getting butt naked and was like inside of this balloon thing, like moving around. And I was like, he's totally naked. And she's like, yeah. I mean, they had his junk covered on TV. They had like a little mosaic over it or whatever. And I'm like, so the entire studio audience has seen his junk.
And it's no big deal.
She's like, yeah, you know, I mean, but that happens on variety shows all the time. But you'll see things where people will get really drunk, and when they get really drunk, they'll just take all their clothes off and be like, woo, and just go crazy.
In Japan?
And people are just like, oh yeah, he's just drunk. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just like being naked is just not a big deal here, you know?
I never would have thought that. I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought they were like highly conservative and reserved, and nudity is frowned upon. That's what I assumed, but you're saying it's the opposite in Japan.
It's interesting because in one respect, if you look at the way that women dress,
yeah,
you know, like they wear a lot of layers of things, right? And you rarely ever see Japanese women with their shoulders out.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like you'll see American women and they'll be wearing like a little like spaghetti strap.
Okay, that's what I mean.
Japanese women, they never have their shoulders out.
Okay.
You know? Even if you look at kimono covers you from here literally all the way down. So there's no open skin.
So that goes against what you just said. So they're not comfortable with nudity, specifically with the women.
Yeah. So like but you know, like I said, it's just different. And I don't know how else to describe it.
So you're saying men are comfortable with nudity, but women are not.
Generally just don't care. But women are, you know, I mean, women are supposed to not do that. But obviously, like, there's just porn everywhere.
That's the part that I was like concerned about. I'm like, there's just like a bunch of porn, and it's usually like animated porn. And it's like right there on the stand. So I have no idea why there's a cultural thing with that. But what you said, to your point, is like there's a lot of virgin men. There's a lot of like, you know, lack of physical touch. So people don't really experience the courtship process in a large volume like you might see in other places. So that kind of makes sense. And I can, but you obviously experienced it to some degree.
Yeah.
Right. And you're married.
Yeah.
To a Japanese woman.
Yeah. So they say on average, you have to date 11 people to really understand what you need in a partner. Okay. Is what it's a very specific number. From what I've read, like statistically for successful marriages, you have to date about 11 people to figure out what it is that you want and need in a partner. And oftentimes with a lot of people in Japan, you know, they'll get married real young. So they'll maybe only date one or two. So they'll, you know, get married without a strong concept of who's actually right for them. Wow. Which is another reason that people will, you know, oftentimes be kind of they'll end up in marriages that are unhappy. Right? Really? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you're married.
Yeah.
So walk me through the process of what it was like courting a Japanese woman as a black man in Japan.
All right. Well, I mean, with my wife, it was different because my wife had lived in the States before.
Got it. Okay.
So, you know, and with a lot of the foreigners that marry with Japanese women or foreign, you know, women who marry with Japanese women, they marry the ones that have international experience.
Got it.
And they kind of already have a concept of how, you know, how Americans are or how Canadians are or whatever. Right. So like my wife, she already speaks English. She's lived in the States before. She loves the States. For her, she likes it because there's no pressure. Because like I said, in Japan, social pressure is quite strong. Yeah, you know, I mean, she always felt like there's a lot of pressure for her here in terms of how she has to behave and how she has to sit and how her makeup has to be done. So she likes going to the States because in America, man, you can go to the store in your pajamas and nobody cares.
I don't know if I agree with that. I agree. What you said is correct. I don't know if I agree with the. So all right. So people are.
But you know what? People. You know what I think? I think part of it is too. And this is something that I figured out is there's also a big cultural difference between big city people and small town people as well.
What do you mean?
Right. So, because I think, for example, you know, as the kind of, if you're you're a New Yorker, yes?
Yeah.
So I think the kind of, even though, we're both raised in the States, I think New York American culture is different from, for example, small town Michigan American culture.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I think it's the same in Japan, that Tokyo culture is very particular and it's very different from the culture of small town Japan, or even very different from Osaka's culture. Like you look at, like, for example, New York people, how people walk and talk and behave in New York versus LA, and there's big differences.
Okay.
Right. And you see the same thing within Japan. So when you're looking at these cultural differences, you also have to take into account the particular city that you're in as well. Like, for example, people in Tokyo are mad shy. People in Osaka aren't shy at all.
Okay.
Like, they're super outgoing and just like it's perfectly easy to talk to strangers in Osaka, right?
I gotta make a note of that. I gotta stop in Osaka.
Yeah. Like one of the easiest, in Japan, it said the easiest way to know the difference between somebody from Tokyo and Osaka is if you walk up to a random person, you're like, bang, to somebody in Osaka, then they'll go, and they'll play along, right? If you do that to somebody in Tokyo, they'll look at you like, I don't know you. Who are you? You know what I mean? Like, that's how you tell the difference between Osaka and Tokyo. Anybody in Osaka will just kind of like, they'll play along with the joke.
I'm gonna do that in Harlem and see if I can survive that. Bang. No. But okay, but again, you're married to a Japanese woman, even though she is very comfortable with the American culture. So assimilating to a relationship with you probably wasn't that difficult, but her parents aren't American.
Yeah.
So what was it like meeting her family as a black man living in Japan, meeting your Japanese wife's family?
Oh man, that was raw. That was really raw.
Really? What happened?
Her father straight up told me no, like the first 2 times I said I was going to marry her. He was like, all right. I was like, yeah, so I'd like to marry your daughter. And he's like, nope.
Just like that?
And I was like, yeah. And he's like, nope, not going to let that happen. And then my wife was just like, just come back and try again later, So, and then eventually he figured out that, like, I'm not going to go away. So he's like, all right.
How many times did it take for you to keep going back?
It took, I think I got it on it was the second or third time, But just the fact that, like, I'm kind of like, bro, I'm just going to do it anyway, right? So yeah. I'm asking just to be polite and out of respect. So I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm not going to let you just shoot me down.
Was it because he saw you as this black man, or because you weren't Japanese?
It was, I don't know. Could be either one, but he's like, first of all, you're a foreigner. You don't speak Japanese very well. You're an actor, so you don't have a regular job. So not happening, right? And then him and I, we've had some nasty headbutts.
Has he ever been disrespectful to you?
Oh yeah.
Like what has he done? What has your wife's father done to you?
So we're family, so I'm not gonna get into that. But we've been through some pretty raw stuff. But at this point, I have his respect, and I've earned it honestly. Okay. And he really respects the fact that I earned his respect honestly. Okay. And at this point, he really, really respects me. So, but I mean, yeah, we went through some real nasty stuff to get there. So I'm sorry that I don't really want to talk about it, but it's just because
I get it. I listen. It was an opportunity to learn your experience, and I get that it's a personal thing and completely respectful. But what about on the other end of the spectrum, like your family? How was your family receiving of your Japanese wife?
Oh, my family was totally cool. They love her. Yeah. But at the same time, they don't get because they hadn't been abroad before. Well, I mean, a lot of my family had traveled abroad, but they didn't get a lot of the quirks about her personality aren't necessarily her. It was just the culture that she comes from. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and so they would be like, well, why is she doing this? Or why is she doing that? And it's just because of the culture that she comes from. It isn't necessarily her. Yeah. And that was something, it was a growth process. But you know, I mean, and like, no marriage is perfect. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has drama within their family. You know, everybody has. If it's a real marriage, then people have problems. You know what I mean? Like that's just, you can't spend so much time with any one person.
Yeah.
Without eventually finding out things that you don't necessarily like, or finding out that you have values that are very, very different, especially when it gets to raising kids, because then she's got this whole concept of how she was raised.
Yeah.
I have this whole concept of how I was raised. A lot of them are like diametrically opposed, you know, but for us, the way that we were raised was the right way to raise a child. You know what I'm saying? So
to each of you individually, that's your perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have kids. How many kids do you have?
I just got one. I got one little boy who looks exactly like me, except that he's Asian.
Okay.
But he's got exactly the same face. Like it's
the same face, but he's Asian. So
yeah, but he's light skinned. He has slightly like some slight epicanthal folds around his eyes, and he has perfectly straight hair. But other than that, he has exactly the same face. It's the craziest thing ever.
But let me ask you a question. So you mentioned that your wife, who's Japanese, and yourself, who's from Detroit, probably had some like butting head moments of how to raise your child, right?
Yeah.
Give me some examples of like some upbringing challenges you had based on your experience growing up as a child, or, you know, in your community and her community, that was very opposing in how you were raising your child together.
Well, one of the things that we go back and forth about a lot is, you know, which language do we make his first language? Ooh. You know, because right now he's perfectly bilingual.
Okay.
And that's very, very hard to do. So we're both very proud of the fact that he's native in both languages. That's really hard.
But English just through you though.
Through me, and then also because I would fly him back home, you know, a few times every year to spend time with family in the States. So he's in a completely English environment. You know, my Taekwondo school that I run in an area called Roppongi. Yeah. It's in a large expatriate community. So it's all expat kids. So it's all international kids. So everybody speaks English. We do everything. I've worked very, very hard to keep him in at least 50% of the time in an English speaking environment. Right. But that's one thing, is like, all right, how do we handle the language? Does he go to a regular Japanese school, or does he go to an international school? You know, so, and then how do we find that balance between, you know, because one of the things that I love about America is America's all about, like I said, individual freedom, and then creativity and finding your own way to do things, and like unapologetically being you.
Trailblazer. You
know, like that's very American, and I love that about America. Right.
Yeah.
In Japan, it's all about social harmony, which generally means you can't unapologetically be you, because you have to compromise for the sake of social harmony.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, how do we find the balance there? Right. Is the question. So.
But how? Okay. So you have a child that you guys are, you know, negotiating how to raise. How old is your child?
He's 6.
He's 6 years old, and he's got a lot of growing to do. And there's so many different directions it could go, given your perspective, and your wife, who's Japanese, you know, she has a million ways that she can go with it as well. But what about the community as a whole? How does the community receive your child, who's both, I guess, a melanated, you know, for lack of a better word, you know, black man or black boy, who's
he's also like a foot taller than everybody else too. So
okay, right? So, that's really right. So living in Japan as a child who's coming from a parent who's from Detroit and a mother who's Japanese, what is it that your child experiences?
So far, we haven't had any issues with anybody, because he goes to a regular Japanese school, because we wanted him to go to a Japanese school first, because the Japanese written language is so much harder than the English written language. Shocking. Yeah. Like, yeah. You know, three different alphabets, one of which has like 20,000 characters, right? So we thought, okay, well, he should go to school for Japanese, because that's the harder language to learn, the harder written language to learn.
Yeah.
So he's going to an all Japanese school, and so far so good. You know, I never want him to be picked on, because he was the kid that's different.
Okay.
So at his school, I just made sure that like everybody knows Ty's dad and everybody likes Ty's dad. You know what I mean? Like all the teachers like me there, and then like all the little kids, like they know that I'm Ty's daddy. Right. And then like I'm
Is
just
it
super
because
friendly
because they know based on what you look like, or because you made yourself like known there?
It's because, I mean, obviously I stand out like a sore thumb when I walk in. Like everybody knows when they look at him, they look at me. Again, same face too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But also I worked very hard to make sure that everybody in his school knows that Ty's daddy is different, but Ty's daddy's really cool too. You know what I mean? So as to give them a very positive preconception of how of foreign people, because these are children, right? Like a lot of them, I'm the first foreign person they've ever met. So I want them to think foreigners are you know, I want them to just have to view people that are different as a positive thing, instead of as a negative thing. So I work really hard to make sure all the kids in the school like Ty's daddy.
I really like what you said there, because it kind of comes full circle what you said at the beginning of the conversation, which is, as a, for lack of a better word, black man living in Japan, you get to create your own narrative of who you are without having to piggyback off of what America thinks of you through the history of what they've seen on TV, or, you know, the isolated incidents that they've experienced. You know, to be able to raise your child in a community where you can write his own history, write his own story that is positive in the community that surrounds him. I think that's a very, very, very powerful thing. And
thank you.
I'm very appreciative of being able to hear those stories.
Thank you. Thank you. And like what I hope is you'll have these kids when they're in their 20s and their 30s, then they'll be able to, you know, when they see somebody that's different, there won't be that like, oh my God, what is that? They'll be like, oh yeah. He's like Ty's dad. Ty's dad was super cool. I remember Ty's dad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want them to have that feeling. Because for me, like the first foreign country I ever went to was Korea. And you know, my best friend in high school was Korean.
Yeah.
So I spent a large amount of my time around Koreans when I was young.
Yeah.
So for me, even though I don't speak Korean well anymore, because I haven't, you know, my Korean lexicon's been completely replaced with Japanese. I still speak a little bit. I can still read emails and respond to emails and things, but you know, my speaking is not there anymore.
Okay.
But even so, hearing Korean language feels very warm to me, because that was the language of my best friend. You know what I mean? And like seeing Korean faces generally makes me feel happy, because it reminds me of those childhood experiences with my best friend. And it reminds me of my experiences doing Taekwondo in Korea and all that. Right.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good.
Yeah. So I'd like those kids to have that same feeling with me, you know, as they get older and they become adults, and then they're making decisions and they're voting and all that other stuff, you know?
So all this experience you've had in Japan as a black man living in Japan, you gone through all the culture shock, you married a Japanese woman, you have like a very beautiful child that now lives in Japan, who's going to be part of this next generation of humans in that community that is creating some level of diversity in culture. What is the message you have for both the people in Japan and the people in the United States, given your personal experience living in Japan as a black man?
So I'm actually really glad you asked me this question, just because I've actually got to run in a few minutes. So I got to hard out in a little bit. Yep. So I think this will be a really nice way to just kind of wrap things up.
Yep.
But I think the best thing that anyone can ever do is to look at people as an empty cup when you first meet them. You know what I mean? Instead of going in there with loaded preconceptions. You know what I mean? And that's for literally everybody, because what happens is everyone naturally projects people that they already knew onto people that they're just meeting. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody does that, right? You'd be like, oh, this person's just like that person.
Yep.
But in actuality, no two people are the same. Mm-hmm. Right. And in that can have positive ramifications where, or, you know, I mean, where you could be like, I like this person because he was like that person. Yeah. Or it can have negative ramifications where you dislike somebody that may actually be a very, very good thing in your life because you're projecting somebody else onto them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the best thing that anyone can ever do is when you meet somebody, just acknowledge the fact that you know nothing about them, that they're not anyone else that you've ever met.
Yeah.
And then you just fill in, and then it's like a jigsaw puzzle where over time you talk to them and you'd be like, all right, there's one more piece to the puzzle. All right, there's one more piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
All right, there's one more piece to the puzzle. And I think with people that are kind of dangerous, you know what I mean? Like people that are pathological liars or people that are selfish or things like that, as those pieces fill in, you'll start to know, like, you'll be like, all right, I need to be careful around this person.
Like that person, not what that person looks like, but that person.
Exactly. You're like, all right, this is a person that is dangerous for whatever reason, and I need to be careful around this person. I don't know that completely yet, but I'm going to be very careful around this person. I'm going to be careful about what I do. I'm going to be careful about guarding my things or what I say. Right.
Okay.
And then on the other side of the coin, there's times where somebody can make, a horrible first impression, but it could have just been that they were just having a really bad day.
Yeah.
Or it could have been that like they're in the middle of working through a divorce, or like one of their parents just died. Like, you don't know what's going on in people's lives. Right. So even if somebody is really negative, it probably doesn't have anything to deal with you. It's just, they're just dealing with some really horrible stuff in their own life. And then they're projecting that onto you. Right. So, I mean, I had one interview, and the day that I met this dude, he was like 2 hours late. You know what I mean? And like he had just had an awful, awful day.
Yeah.
And my first impression was so bad.
Yeah.
But, we did the interview and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And the guy turned out to be such an amazing human being and such an amazing person. And I just happened to meet him at a time that he was having a very bad day. And that's all that it was.
Got it.
Right. So you have that happening as well, so. That's
very inspirational. And I appreciate you sharing with like the audience and people in general. And I hope you spread that kind of message in your community and others as well. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I thoroughly did.
So did I. Thank you, bro.
Thank you. How do people reach out to you if they want to connect, or if they want to like collaborate, or if you want to share some of what you do with them? How do they get in touch with you?
I'm all over the internet.
Okay,
so
like Google me.
My company is Quiet Flame Productions.
Okay.
So, and the website is just quietflame.org. If anybody that wants to see what I do specifically. Quiet Flame also has an Instagram. I also have an Instagram. It's just, and then I have a YouTube channel as well. My YouTube channel is just Chuck Johnson.
And what's your IG?
So IG is Chuck .action. Chuck in action.
Got it. So, that's a good one.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd like to think I'm pretty easy to find for anybody that wants to reach out. And like, I love talking to people. So I'm a pretty busy guy, but
I can tell you're very charismatic, and I thoroughly enjoy this conversation. My name is Jeff Damisse. You can find me at j.damisse for IG, or j_damisse for Twitter or Clubhouse or whatever you want to call it. The YouTube podcast channel, you can find on IG at Introspect_Club. That's everywhere. Twitter, Patreon, IG, TikTok, you name it. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment. We want to hear everybody's feedback, because there's a lot of things we discuss here, and there's a lot of things we will be discussing in future episodes. So make sure you guys log in and subscribe to the channel, so that way we can keep this thing going. And if you have any questions you want to ask that you want us to answer on the show at any given time, please make sure you hit me up on my DMs. And if you are a unique individual that lived a very interesting life or had a very interesting experience and feel like other people can learn from it, reach out to me. I might be able to get you on the show. Chuck, my man, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Appreciate your time.
All right. Absolutely. Appreciate you too. Thank you for having me.
Until next time.
All right, my man.